Imagine landing at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Luxury brands everywhere, cafes spilling onto the streets, 5 weeks of paid vacation, free healthcare. On paper, this should be one of the richest countries on earth. So why does it no longer feel that way? How can a country that looks this wealthy be quietly making its middle class poorer every year? Today, nearly 1 out of every 5 French workers earns the legal minimum wage, while that minimum sits uncomfortably close to the country's median take-home income. At the same time, housing costs in France's major cities have moved far beyond what a typical salary can sustain. Millions of households remain employed, yet live only a few hundred euros away from financial stress. The illusion of prosperity is still there, but underneath it lies a system held together by rising debt, demographic pressure, and a welfare model built for a different economic era. This is not a story about collapse you can see. It is a story about decline you can live inside without noticing. France's situation cannot be understood through the usual markers of economic crisis. Unemployment is not exploding. Shops are open. Infrastructure functions. The state continues to provide services. What is happening instead is a slow erosion of living standards that hides behind stability. Economists describe this pattern as pressure on disposable living standards. People remain employed, yet the space between income and unavoidable costs shrinks year after year. Rent, utilities, transport, and basic services absorb a growing share of earnings. What remains for savings, mobility, or risk-taking becomes thinner. One mechanism sits at the center of this process. In France, the legal minimum wage is indexed closely to inflation. When prices rise, the wage floor rises with them. This protects the lowest earners from sudden shocks and helps preserve social peace. But the same mechanism compresses wages above the minimum. Salary scales flatten as the bottom rises faster than the middle. This phenomenon is often referred to as smycodization. It does not eliminate the income ladder. It shortens it. Experience, responsibility, and education still matter, but they translate into smaller differences in take-home pay than in the past. Over time, the distinction between entry-level income and middle income narrows. Labor costs amplify this effect. France has one of the highest tax wedges on work in advanced economies. For a typical employee, nearly half of what an employer pays never reaches the worker as spendable income. Social contributions finance healthcare, pensions, and unemployment insurance, but they also limit the room companies have to raise wages. This system was built under different conditions. Growth was stronger. The population was younger. Industry employed a larger share of the workforce. Those factors absorbed the cost of protection. Today, growth is slower, demographics are tightening, and industrial employment has declined. The structure remains, but the foundations have shifted. Housing makes this shift tangible. Rent does not adjust downward when wages stagnate. Neither do energy bills or transportation costs. Even without a crisis, households feel poorer because the margin between stability and vulnerability disappears. This is why France can look wealthy and still feel constrained. The system continues to function, but it no longer delivers the same sense of progress. Stability remains, yet mobility weakens. Employment persists, yet motivation erodes. Once this distinction is clear, the next step becomes unavoidable. Understanding the feeling of decline requires examining the structures that produced it. For decades, France made a deliberate economic choice. It prioritized stability over flexibility, social peace over rapid adjustment. This trade-off was not hidden. It was written directly into labor law, employment protection, and workplace regulation. The intention was clear: shield workers from sudden shocks, prevent mass layoffs, reduce volatility. For a long time, the approach delivered exactly that. Employment became more secure. Conflict was contained. Predictability replaced uncertainty. But predictability came with a structural cost. As rules governing hiring and dismissal became more complex, employment decisions changed. Adding a worker was no longer a short-term calculation. It became a long-term legal commitment. For large firms, this was manageable. For small and mid-sized companies, it became a constraint. Expansion slowed not because demand disappeared, but because risk increased. The data reflects this shift. France's employment rate among working-age adults has consistently lagged behind that of countries with more flexible labor markets, even during periods of economic recovery. Firms did not stop operating. They adapted by limiting hiring, flattening internal pay scales, and reducing differentiation between roles. This is where upward mobility quietly stalled. When hiring slows, promotion slows. When promotion slows, wage progression flattens. Responsibility increases without proportional reward. A system designed to protect workers ends up protecting positions instead. The economy does not collapse under this model. It stabilizes. Volatility falls, but stability without momentum creates a ceiling. Over time, that ceiling sinks relative to living costs and expectations. Workers remain employed, yet advancement feels increasingly out of reach. Policy did not fail because it lacked good intentions. It failed because it treated growth as a risk to be managed rather than a necessity to be sustained. When stability becomes the primary objective and mobility becomes the casualty, the question can no longer be avoided. How long can a society continue to promise opportunity without changing the rules that govern it? Over the second half of the 20th century, France's economy was anchored by its ability to produce. Manufacturing sustained regional towns, supported mid-skill wages, and generated export income that did not rely solely on domestic consumption. That foundation weakened gradually, without a single defining moment. As production shifted abroad, manufacturing declined as a share of national output, settling at roughly 1/10 of the economy. The transition was often framed as modernization. Services expanded, tourism flourished, high-value brands became global symbols. On the surface, the economy looked cleaner, more sophisticated, and more efficient. What disappeared was not visibility, but resilience. Industrial capacity does more than produce goods. It anchors supply chains, stabilizes employment outside major cities, and provides a buffer when global conditions deteriorate. As factories closed and production relocated, entire regions lost their economic core. Replacement jobs appeared, but they rarely matched the wages, security, or productivity of the roles they replaced. The vulnerability of this shift became clear during periods of global stress. When supply chains tightened, France confronted a simple reality. Many basic goods and inputs were no longer produced domestically in sufficient quantities. Dependence on foreign production had become structural rather than exceptional. This dependence carries a hidden cost. It transfers bargaining power outward. It exposes the economy to shocks it cannot control. And it reduces the state's ability to respond quickly when disruptions occur. Efficiency in calm periods turns into fragility under pressure. Services and luxury exports can sustain activity and prestige, but they cannot replace the stabilizing role of a broad industrial base. An economy that consumes more than it produces becomes increasingly reliant on redistribution and borrowing to maintain balance. As industrial capacity thins, the system must compensate elsewhere. That compensation does not come for free. It shows up in taxes, transfers, and growing strain on public finances. Once production weakens, the burden shifts inward, and that shift leads directly to the next structural constraint. France's social model rests on a clear promise. In exchange for high contributions, citizens receive protection against life's major risks. Healthcare, pensions, unemployment insurance, and family support form the core of that contract. For decades, it delivered stability and social cohesion. The arithmetic behind the promise has changed. Social spending in France now absorbs roughly 1/3 of national output, among the highest levels in advanced economies. Financing this system requires an exceptional flow of revenue. Taxes and mandatory social contributions together claim close to half of what the economy produces each year. The largest share of that burden falls on labor. For a typical worker, nearly half of what an employer pays never becomes spendable income. This tax wedge shapes behavior on both sides of the labor market. Employers face higher costs for each additional euro of salary. Employees see limited gains in net pay even when gross wages rise. Over time, salary progression slows and differentiation narrows. The pressure concentrates in the middle. Lower earners are partially shielded by indexed minimum wages and transfers. Higher earners have buffers and mobility. Middle-income households absorb the adjustment. Disposable income tightens. Saving becomes harder. Financial security grows fragile despite continued employment. Demographics intensify the strain. France's pension system operates largely on a pay-as-you-go basis. Current workers finance current retirees. As the population ages, fewer contributors support more beneficiaries. Each active worker carries a heavier load, not because benefits expanded dramatically, but because the base funding them shrank. Political responses have favored incremental adjustment over structural reform. Contributions rise quietly. Eligibility rules are refined. Retirement ages move in small steps. These measures preserve calm in the short term, but they do not change the underlying dynamics. The system stretches instead of adapting. What makes this trap powerful is its invisibility. Benefits continue to be paid. Services function, though less smoothly. There is no sudden rupture, only gradual tightening. Households adapt by lowering expectations rather than demanding change. When a welfare state grows faster than the economy that sustains it, pressure does not explode outward. It concentrates inward. And when the middle is asked to carry more each year without seeing progress in return, consent becomes increasingly fragile. At that point, another response begins to take shape, not through protest alone, but through exit. As pressure builds within the system, not everyone responds in the same way. Some adapt by lowering expectations. Others look for ways out. Over time, this divergence reshapes the economy itself. France continues to educate a large number of highly skilled engineers, researchers, and professionals. Its universities and elite schools remain competitive by international standards. The problem is not the production of talent. It is where that talent chooses to build its future. For many high-skilled workers, the calculation is increasingly clear. Career progression at home is slower. The gap between effort and reward feels narrow. Regulatory complexity adds friction at every stage of growth, whether in business formation, expansion, or investment. Abroad, the incentives look different. Pay scales are steeper, capital is more accessible, risk is rewarded more visibly. Over time, these individual decisions accumulate. A significant share of France's highly educated workforce builds careers outside the country. Entrepreneurs register companies elsewhere. Researchers follow funding. Professionals gravitate toward financial and technology hubs where scale is easier to achieve. Innovation does not disappear. It relocates. The cost of this movement is structural. Public resources finance education and training. Other economies capture the returns in productivity, tax revenue, and technological leadership. At home, the ecosystem loses momentum. Fewer firms grow to scale. Fewer examples of success reset expectations upward. This dynamic feeds back into the broader system. When ambition finds its reward elsewhere, those who remain adjust their goals. Careers tilt toward security rather than expansion. Entrepreneurship becomes cautious. The economy grows calmer but less dynamic. Debt and redistribution can soften the impact for years. Services continue to operate. Living standards decline slowly rather than abruptly. But an economy that exports its ambition weakens its ability to renew itself over time. Once renewal slows, the consequences extend beyond wages and opportunity. They begin to surface in public services, regional inequality, and political tension. France's trajectory becomes clearer when placed alongside its peers. What feels like a uniquely French malaise is, in fact, one variant of a broader challenge facing advanced economies. The difference lies in how adjustment occurs and who is asked to bear the cost. Since the global financial crisis, the gap between the United States and much of Europe has widened. The American economy recovered faster and sustained stronger momentum. Growth resumed, investment returned, and productivity gains accumulated. In Europe, recovery was slower and more uneven. Output stabilized, but expansion remained muted. France sits at the center of this divergence. Employment held up, but income progression lagged. This contrast reflects structural choices. The United States absorbed adjustment through volatility. Inequality widened, but opportunity at the top expanded quickly. Europe, and France in particular, chose to absorb adjustment internally. Wages compressed, taxes increased, redistribution smoothed shocks across society. Stability was preserved, but at the cost of dynamism. Germany offers a different comparison. Its stronger industrial base provided resilience through exports and manufacturing networks. That model delivered steady income and regional balance for years. But it also created dependence on external inputs and trade partners. When geopolitical conditions shifted, those vulnerabilities surfaced. Growth slowed. Industrial output faltered. France avoided some of this exposure by relying less on industry, but it paid a different price through weaker long-term productivity. Southern Europe illustrates yet another adjustment path. In countries such as Italy and Spain, limited fiscal space and weak productivity forced sharper corrections. Unemployment surged, younger workers emigrated, social strain became visible. France took a quieter route. It absorbed pressure through taxes, transfers, and wage compression, keeping unemployment lower but constraining advancement. Each model carries consequences. When pressure is concentrated, crisis is visible. When pressure is diffused, decline is harder to detect. In France, the latter path reshaped geography and politics. Major cities continued to attract capital, talent, and services. Smaller towns lost industry and population. Public employment and transfers filled some of the gap, but could not restore momentum. This dynamic feeds political fragmentation. No single group collapses outright, but many feel constrained. Younger workers question a system they fund without clear future returns. Older generations defend protections built under different demographic conditions. Reform becomes risky. Delay becomes tempting. France's experience matters because it offers a preview. Many advanced welfare states face the same forces: aging populations, rising debt, and slowing productivity. France encountered them earlier and chose to manage adjustment internally rather than confront it directly. If these questions remain unresolved, the consequences do not arrive as a sudden crisis. They accumulate slowly as frustration, polarization, and declining confidence in institutions. France's current trajectory is not irreversible. The pressures described so far are structural, but structures can be redesigned. The difficulty lies in choosing reforms that restore momentum without dismantling the social protections that define the country. Any sustainable solution begins with growth, not redistribution alone. A welfare state can only remain generous if the economy that funds it expands. That means restoring a visible link between effort and reward, particularly in the middle of the income distribution. Reducing the effective burden on labor, especially for mid-level wages, would widen the gap between the minimum and the median and reverse some of the compression that undermines motivation. Productivity is the second pillar. France invests heavily in education, but returns weaken when innovation struggles to scale domestically. Simplifying the path from startup to expansion, improving access to capital, and reducing regulatory friction would help keep high-growth firms at home. The objective is not fewer rules, but faster transitions from idea to scale. Industrial capacity also matters. Recent shocks expose the risks of relying entirely on global supply chains for essential goods and inputs. Rebuilding selected industrial capabilities in energy, pharmaceuticals, and strategic components would strengthen resilience without abandoning services or high-value exports. The goal is balance, not retreat. Demographics impose the hardest constraints. Pension systems built for larger working populations must adapt to longer lifespans and lower birth rates. Gradual increases in effective retirement age, incentives for higher labor participation, and carefully managed immigration expand the contributor base without sudden disruption. Delay does not remove this arithmetic, it only increases its eventual cost. The alternative to reform is not stability, it is drift. Continued borrowing can preserve social peace for a time, but it narrows future choices. As debt servicing absorbs more resources, flexibility shrinks and adjustment becomes harsher. France still has room to choose. Its institutions remain strong. Its workforce is skilled. Its social contract retains broad support. The question is whether change arrives through deliberate design or through mounting pressure. On an ordinary day, life in France looks calm. Trains run, offices open, cafes fill. Nothing appears broken. And that is precisely why this story matters. The most consequential declines do not announce themselves with chaos. They unfold quietly through incentives that no longer reward effort, systems that stretch instead of adapt, and promises built for a different era. France is not poor in absolute terms. It remains educated, productive, and institutionally strong. But wealth is not only a snapshot, it is a direction. When wages compress near the bottom, when living costs rise faster than income, and when growth slows while obligations remain fixed, living standards erode without triggering alarm. What has unfolded is not failure, but the limit of a model. For decades, France chose stability over volatility, redistribution over disruption, and social peace over rapid adjustment. Those choices delivered security and cohesion. Today, they also constrain mobility, ambition, and renewal. This experience carries a lesson beyond one country. Many advanced economies face the same forces: aging populations, rising debt, slower productivity, and resistance to reform. France encountered them earlier and absorbed them internally. Its path shows what happens when decline is managed rather than confronted. The question now is not whether the system can survive as it is. It can for a time. The real question is whether it can evolve before erosion becomes irreversible. Incentives shape outcomes. Systems that fail to adapt quietly weaken even when they look stable on the surface. For viewers watching from elsewhere, the takeaway is simple. Do not be distracted by appearances. Look at the incentives. Look at the structure. Look at the direction. If this story feels uncomfortably familiar, it may be worth asking whether the same dynamics are already unfolding closer to home.